Here's the recording of page 53 to 57, and it's the story The Beautiful Bead. It is a curious truth that people generally prize what they do not have more than what they have in abundance. Sumer, as you must know, is rich in barley and wheat, but it possesses little timber, few precious stones, and no gold. Thus, what is it that the kings and queens of the Sumerian city-states desire most? Well, timber, yes, but that is not what warms their hearts. After all, these Mesopotamian rulers think they are related to gods and goddesses. Within their cities, they build grand palaces and temples. They wear elaborate headdresses and swathe themselves in costly stones and gold. Oh, yes, they adore gold, though it is nowhere to be found in their own homelands. For that reason, ships laden with Sumerian grain routinely set forth, manned by traders who travel to and from an island on the southern sea. There all manner of goods are bought and sold: copper from the south, blue stones and red stones from the east, and gold, great quantities of dazzling gold. So it was that a gold trader from the city of headed to the harbor one morning. He boarded a large wooden ship that made its way down the river, then southward through the sea. For many days the sailors pulled the oars with their mighty muscled arms. When the ship docked at the island, the trader bartered sacks of wheat for a bag of gold beads. After a brief stay, the vessel headed back to Sumer. The trader kept his gold beads in a pouch around his neck. On board the ship, the trader found a place to sit. He spread a cloth in his lap, took the pouch from around his neck, and poured the precious contents onto the cloth. One by one, he picked up the beads and rolled them between his fingers, now smiling at the bright luster of one, now frowning at the somber dullness of another. As he picked up one bead, he involuntarily gasped, for it stood out from the rest, so dazzling, smooth, alluring. Over and over he rolled it between his fingers, enjoying the very feel of it, until he heard approaching footsteps. Quickly he poured the gold beads back into his pouch, which he then draped around his neck. He turned and saw one of the burly sailor standing and watching him with an air of curiosity. The trader, as though he had not a care in the world, addressed the sailor in an idle tone. "We seem to be making good speed," he remarked. "May the gods favor our voyage. I am eager to be back on land. How much farther?" "We reach tomorrow," the sailor answered, grunting as he lowered a heavy sack to the deck. "After we unload, I will set out for home." "And where is home?" asked the trader. "Uruk," said the sailor, "to the north." "You should stay in for a while," the trader advised. "There is more wonderful city in all of Sumer." The sailor gave a skeptical grunt. "Well," he replied, "you may say what you want of but it's clear that you haven't seen the White Temple at Uruk. It is dedicated to the sky god, Anu, and is almost as big as the city itself." "How very nice," smiled the trader, "though I have heard that as cities go, Uruk is not as large. I tell you," he continued, "in our temple to the moon god Nana has 3 huge stairways leading to the shrine at the top, and the walls surrounding are so high that no invader would dare scale them. Why, 30,000 people live inside those walls." "The walls of Uruk make those of look like fences," the sailor retorted. "You know, of course, that the great Gilgamesh himself built our walls." The trader refused to be outdone. "Ah, but have you ever set eyes on Puba, our queen? She shines with the radiance that dims the sun. Her person alone is bedecked with fabulous jewelry, worth more than the wealth of the whole kingdom. Look here, said the trader, carried away with his own enthusiasm. I will show you gold beads that will become a necklace for her. Yes, the Queen Pooh-Bah herself. The trader pulled the pouch from around his neck and poured dozens of shining beads into the palm of his outstretched hand. Splendid, are they not? The trader beamed. The sailor was impressed by the gold, but he only scowled and bent down to pick up his sack. As he tossed the sack over his shoulder and began to walk off, he grunted, "Well, those are pretty little beads." He placed a special stress on little. But come to see the temple of the sky god in Uruk. Then, my friend, you'll know what splendid is. The trader smiled, satisfied that he had proven the superiority of Then he poured the beads back into the pouch, secured it around his neck, and went to seek a resting place for the night. The next morning, shortly after sunrise, the ship pulled into the harbor at Home at last, the trader sighed as he left the vessel. Meanwhile, the sailor prepared to begin unloading the ship's cargo. As he lifted the hatch to the ship's hold, a shaft of sunlight pierced the darkness below. Out of the corner of his eye, the sailor spied something gleaming, reflecting the sunlight. He reached down, and plucked out a bead, the beautiful golden bead that had caused the trader to gasp in amazement, and which the evening before had slipped from the trader's hand as he poured his beads back into his pouch. "Well, well, my glittery bead," said the sailor. "So the braggart dropped you, did he?" The sailor rolled the bead in his rough, weathered hands. Then he wrapped it in a scrap of cloth, carefully stuffed it into a pouch, and set to work with the other sailors to unload the ship's cargo. When the ship was at last unloaded, the sailor eagerly made his way from the harbor to the city of Indeed, the trader's boasts were true. The walls of the city were very high, and the gate was formidable. As the sailor passed through the gate, he could see thousands of flat-roofed houses that lined a vast maze of streets. Was indeed a marvelous city. The sailor wound his way through the twisted streets of the city, surrounded by noisy crowds and the hum, buzz, and clatter of people buying, selling, working. One moment he heard the spinning of a potter's wheel, next the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, then the tapping of a sculptor's chisel. After a time the sailor found what he was looking for. As he entered the jeweler's shop, the pungent smell of heated gold stung his nostrils. The sailor took out his pouch and roughly shook the bead into his palm. "How much for this gold bead?" he asked. The jeweler took the bead between his fingers and inspected it carefully. His face showed no emotion, though he knew that he was holding a rare and outstanding specimen. After a moment, the jeweler said, "For this bead, 1 sack of barley." "1 sack of barley!" barked the sailor. "What do you take me for? I know the value of this bead. Why, it's—" Then the word the trader had used came back to him. "It's splendid." The jeweler smiled. "Indeed," he acknowledged, "this is no ordinary golden bead. I will offer you 3 sacks of barley." This satisfied the sailor, but he asked, "Have you no silver ingots?" "I prefer money to grain." "If you insist," said the jeweler, "but only because this is such an outstanding specimen." And so the sailor left with his silver, while the jeweler placed the beautiful bead in a special tray on his work table. "I am not sure how I will use you, my little beauty," the jeweler said to the bead, "but when the time comes, I know I will use you well." The jeweler turned to his other tasks. His craftsmanship was impressive. He gathered a tray of blue lapis lazuli stones. For hours he chipped and smoothed their rough edges. Then he shaped them into beads and drilled holes through them. The next morning the jeweler was stringing various beads on a fine cotton thread. Beads of gold, then red carnelian, silver, lapis, and agate. By the end of the day he had strung almost 50 separate strands, each 20 inches long. As he prepared the last strand he paused. Then his hand reached out for the beautiful golden bead. He threaded it so that it rested in the very center of the top strand. "Yes," he said quietly, "you have found your rightful place, my beautiful bead." The next day the jeweler tied the top of each strand to one long thread. The strands, threaded together, had become a curtain of shimmering stones, with the beautiful golden bead gleaming at the top. "Now, my fine beauties," said the beadle, "you are a cape fit for Queen Poobie." Carefully the jeweler draped the valuable cape over his arm and covered it with linen cloth. Off he went through the streets to the Queen's palace. A few evenings later a great banquet was held in the palace. Attendants strummed melodious lyres, while the appetites of royal visitors were piqued by thoughts of savory beef and foamy beer to come. In the banquet hall a sudden silence fell as Queen Puabi entered. Her subjects bowed low to the ground. When they were allowed to rise, they saw their lovely queen festooned with rings, bracelets, earrings, and a marvelous golden crown. All those, however, seemed but trinkets compared to the magnificent cape draped from the front of her neck to her waist, a cape that seemed a waterfall of droplets of fire, sea, earth, and sky. And there at the top, dazzling the eyes of all viewers, rested a small glowing sun, the beautiful golden bead. And that's the end of the reading of page 53 to 57.